Hello again. I hope you're doing well. I'm here in my home studio in Granville, Ohio. It's a beautiful spring day. I hope it's spring wherever you are, and I hope you're doing well. So we're continuing on. You heard a little bit about environmental justice earlier this week, and now we're going to move to a very closely related topic called political ecology. So you hopefully did a reading on political ecology, so you know a little bit about what it is, but let's talk a little bit about what it means. So one working definition is political ecology is the study of power relations in resource use and environmental management. So you've already seen in environmental justice that there's a disproportionate use of resources and a disproportionate burden on some people to bear the waste and ramifications of resource use. And so there's a power struggle there. There are political situations and social situations that kind of exacerbate those that disparity. And the study of that is called political ecology. So political ecology is really interdisciplinary. It draws upon lots of different academic disciplines like anthropology, political science, scientific ecology, development studies, economics, environmental sociology, environmental history, and geography, and probably others. Even things like gender studies can come into play. So it's sort of the ultimate, in some ways, it's sort of the ultimate interdisciplinary field because it pulls together just about everything else, all the individual studies. It's a fairly new discipline. It really, I guess it had some early origins, but really arose in the 1960s and 70s, along with a lot of the other things we're talking about, and really came into its own, I would say, in the last 30 years or so. So it's a very young field of study, and in some ways still trying to figure out exactly what it is and what it's trying to do. But basically, it considers the relationship between economics, politics, and nature. As I mentioned, it's very interdisciplinary and it uses a lot of different methods, as we'll see in a little bit. This diagram over here is trying to show you some of the aspects. So there's environmental politics and governance involved in it, issues of justice for sure. There's the environmental humanities, which might include things like history. There are basically a lot of different, here's policy and management over here, environmental social science. So all of these are kind of touching on or related to this field of political ecology. Okay, so let's talk about what apolitical ecology might be in comparison. So apolitical ecology is ecology that tries to remove itself from social and cultural bias. In other words, it's trying to test hypotheses based on measurable evidence of natural and social phenomena. So a lot of scientific ecology falls into this category. It's actually trying to avoid cultural bias. Of course, it's still subject to researcher value judgments. The researchers are humans, so they have built-in biases. But for example, in scientific ecology, we try very hard to eliminate things like cultural bias because we want our questions to answer, we want our research to answer a question in an unbiased way. A lot of times apolitical ecologists criticize political ecology for allowing value and bias to drive their research conclusions, when really a scientific ecologist would say your values and your judgment should have nothing to do with it. You should let the data answer the question you're trying to discuss. So an example of apolitical ecology might be this. What is the effect of increased pesticide use on cancer rates? So you could imagine a part of the world that's using a carcinogenic pesticide, and you might study different cancer rates in different populations just to get an idea of using that pesticide, how does it affect cancer rates? Political ecology is the study of social and cultural bias. Excuse me. So in other words, it's not trying to eliminate that bias, it's trying to study that bias. So it considers human society and its biocultural political complexity. Political ecologists often criticize scientific ecology for ignoring things like cultural biases. Excuse me. So an example of a political ecology question on the pesticide thing might be, what are the historic and modern relationships that result in some populations having higher cancer rates than others? Why are we even using these pesticides? Who is suffering from them and who is benefiting or who is profiting? Who has the power in those relationships? That's sort of a political ecology question. So I want to point out to you that neither one of these approaches is wrong. They're just different. And when I say they criticize each other, that's just the nature of academic research. Academic researchers are always criticizing each other about their questions and their approaches and their methods. Clearly, these two approaches both have value. They're both interesting. They might tell us different things about the situation, and they might lob little grenades at each other every now and then, but really they should be compatible, more compatible than they are in reality. So I think, in drawing on some other authors, there are sort of three fundamental assumptions of political ecology, although different people will disagree on these, but I like this way of framing it. First of all, political ecologists assume that there are costs and benefits associated with environmental change that are distributed unequally around the world. We've already seen this in our environmental justice things. That's pretty clear, right? That almost every environmental situation has unequal distribution of goods and bads. Political power plays an important role in these inequalities. Second, this unequal environmental distribution inevitably reinforces existing social and economic inequalities. So what this is saying is there already are inequalities by race, by gender, by ethnicity, the unequal environmental distribution just exacerbates that problem. So there already were inequalities, and the environmental inequalities are reinforcing that. Third, the unequal distribution of costs and benefits and the reinforcing of pre-existing inequalities hold political implications in terms of who has the power and who doesn't have the power. And that this plays out all over the world. You don't have to be in the global south or in the less developed region to see this, that sometimes political advantage is with people, for example, that have more resources and more wealth. So these are some of the things that political ecologists bring to questions. These are sort of underlying assumptions. Here's a picture that kind of describes this, I think, pretty well. So you can see here might be ecosystems that we talked about right before break. And here are social and economic and political systems up here, if I can draw things with my mouse. And then inside the box, we see how those collide. So here are resource systems over here, and resource units like ecosystem services that humans might need to harvest, like fish or timber or fur or coal or oil or copper. On this side, we have governance systems, and we have actors. And what they mean by actors are these are the people that are involved, right? They might be organizations, they might be individuals, they might be farmers, they might be landowners, they might be peasants, they might be global corporations. Those are the actors. And then in the center here, these all collide by interactions and outcomes. And so these are the sort of things that political ecologists like to study, how these resource issues collide with government systems and different actors, and what are the outcomes and how could they be different. I find this diagram to be kind of helpful. This sort of describes what political ecology is all about to me. So political ecology has an underlying view that there are likely better, less coercive, less exploitative, and more sustainable ways of managing environmental systems. So this is kind of important. Political ecology often brings kind of this idea that the systems that we currently use aren't very good in a lot of ways, and they could be better. So in this way, it's kind of activist. I'll come back to that thought in a minute. In your book, it describes political ecology as the hatchet and the seed. That's what these pictures are trying to represent here. So the hatchet part of political ecology means that political ecologists often attempt to split apart and deconstruct all of the actors and players and narratives involved around a situation. So if there's a dispute, for example, over copper mining in Brazil or something like that, they will try to, with their hatchet, split apart who's involved here, what is their situation, what is their access to the resource, what is their political power, what are their advantages and disadvantages, just like you might take a hatchet to a log and split it up into kindling. The seed part of this means that political ecologists also work to introduce new ideas that might better promote equity. So this is something different than scientific ecologists usually do. Usually scientific ecologists don't come at this with an agenda or with an activism idea in mind. But political ecologists often are coming at this saying, hey, this system doesn't work very well. Here are some ways we could improve this system. And those are the seeds they're planting. So actually, this is one of several criticisms of political ecology. Again, criticism doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. It just means that some people have questioned it a little bit. So political ecology can approach an issue with a predetermined notion that a new idea, the seed they would like to plant, would be better. But in fact, they have no evidence that it would be better. It's just their idea. So for example, someone might come into a situation and say, the capitalism of this system is really what's driving this inequity. It would be better if we had a socialist approach. They have no evidence that socialism would be better in that situation, but they might be trying to push that agenda. Or it could be the opposite. Someone could argue that free market capitalism is the solution here, not socialism, and therefore we should try to push to open up markets and make them free, when in fact they have no evidence that that would be any better. Some political ecology work has a very clear political agenda in this way, which may or may not be bad, but it can bias the researcher. So if you are a political ecologist and you're coming at a question already predetermined that capitalism is bad or capitalism is good or communism is bad or whatever it is, then you're already sort of biased. That's what a criticism is anyway. So some political ecologists are doing more activism, trying to change things, than to actually try to understand them. Political ecologists, of course, push back on this and say, of course, they're trying to understand things, but they're taking it to the next level. They're trying to improve things as well. Another criticism of political ecology is that it sometimes is lacking coordination with scientists. So here's a little diagram that shows sort of the Venn diagram of some political ecology. So there's the policy and implementation, rights and responsibilities of the different actors, what we know about the system, and maybe what indigenous knowledge there is and things like that. And then we can look at this at different scales. So the individual scale, household, community, civil society, national, even global scale. So you could look at an issue at different scales. The issue might be right in the center here. Maybe it's copper mining or something like that. Scientific ecologists might say what's really missing from this diagram is environmental science, understanding, for example, how much copper is there? How deep is it? What sort of effects does the extraction of that copper have on ecosystem services? What sort of toxins does it release into the water, and who are affected by those toxins, and so on. So yeah, I think it's true. Sometimes political ecologists, social scientists, and natural scientists don't talk to each other as much as we should. And so adding science into this only strengthens the political ecology and the scientific ecology, I think. So here's a quick example. There are many of these. I borrowed this from the EJ Atlas that you've been taking a look at for your environmental justice lab. So this takes us to Chile in South America, where lots of issues are going on, but water issues are really important here because it's a fairly dry part of the world, especially northern Chile is very dry. And so there are a lot of conflicts over water. You can see this is from the EJ Atlas here, and there are lots of blue circles. So all of those are water issues that involve some sort of environmental justice. A lot of them are about some sort of dam, like hydroelectric power dam that's being proposed or being built, and some people are protesting that. The example I want to talk to you about real quickly here is about agriculture. So in Norte Chico, one of the northern parts of Chile, this is a very water-stressed region, but still they're doing agriculture there. People are ranching and raising crops and things like that. And of course, water is the main limiting factor for how much agriculture can occur and how successful it can be. So there are big farmers and there are small farmers and everything in between that have long had disagreements about who has access to the water. So this is an environmental justice issue. It's also a political ecology issue. So here's a little graph that just shows the demand on water in various parts of Chile. And the center bars here are showing you some of those regions. And you can see green is the agriculture demand on water, and it is the largest demand in these parts of Chile. So here is just an abstract from a political ecology study on this area by a researcher named Jessica Buds from the UK. So she looked at the political ecology of water in Chile, and you can read this abstract on your own. I won't read it all to you, but basically in 1981, Chile instituted something called the, why am I over there? There we go. The Water Code. So this was quite a long time ago. And they were one of the first nations to come up with this idea. And it's as the title implies, a neoliberal approach to water use. And what that means is it's sort of a free market capitalism, trying to let people buy and sell and trade water rights without a lot of government intervention. In some ways, this works really well. In some ways, it doesn't. So there's long been a lot of argument about this water code in Chile. This scholar, Jessica Buds, takes a look at how this plays out in terms of who has access to the water. And she is able to determine that large-scale farmers have greater control over the water, and peasant farmers are increasingly have less access. So over time, it seems that, maybe not surprisingly, this free market capitalism sort of approach to water use is benefiting the large-scale farmers, and it's really pushing small-scale peasant farmers out of business because they no longer have access to the water. Okay, so I'm not making you read the whole paper, but you get the idea that this is really a study of the power struggle around who has access to this water. So you could imagine a lot of different ways you could study this. This gets back to the variety of methods that political ecologists use. You could do ethnographic interviews. So you could do interviews, if you spoke Spanish, to all sorts of people involved in this, politicians and economists and peasant farmers and large-scale farmers and so on, and just try to construct their narratives and compare over the last 30 or 40 years how their use of water has changed. You could do a historical water use analysis. You could actually use data of how much water has been available and who's using it and how much is used and how much is recycled and so on. You could take a gender approach to this. You could interview, let's say, women and men and see how the economic impacts of water scarcity in this system are affecting them differently. That would be a political ecology study. You could analyze the water trading deals that have gone on and try to identify the winners and losers and why have some individuals or organizations always been winners and some have always been losers. You could do a comparative study of this area with another water stressed region of the world that maybe doesn't use a neoliberal approach and uses a very heavy-handed government approach and do a study on, is that better? Is that a better way of allocating water access? So I'm just giving you ideas. This researcher did not use all of these. She mostly did interviews and looking at historical water use data. But you could come up with lots of different approaches to try to get at the power struggle around this resource. And a political ecologist probably would recommend some changes, right? And that's the activism part of this, to say, how could this be better? Maybe if we instituted this sort of system, it would be better in this area. Okay, you get the idea. So to hear a little bit more about political ecology, I will post on Notebowl a link to this. It's a short YouTube. It's about 12 minutes long. And it interviews a bunch of short interviews of political ecologists, mostly from Europe. And it talks about, they each talk about their own perspective on what political ecology is and how it can add to our understanding of environmental issues. So watch that, and I will post that on Notebowl. Here's a quick commercial for next semester. I know all of you are starting to think about scheduling for next semester. That will be interesting, trying to do that remotely, but I think we'll be able to make it work. We actually have a class called Political Ecology. Dr. Henshaw teaches this. It's ENVS 236. Having taken this class, you are absolutely ready to take that class. If you are interested, it is offered next fall, so you can sign up for that if you want to. There's also a Denison seminar for those of you that aren't too old to take Denison seminars. There are a couple of you, I think, called Culture, Environment, and Conflict. I happen to be co-teaching that with one of my colleagues. So it's looking at some of these same issues of environmental resources and cultural misappropriation and disagreements and debates on who gets to use those resources, and the focus is in Australia. And our hope is to go to Australia next January. We're really hoping that that is allowed to happen. I hope the world is back to being normal by then so that we can travel to Australia. So if you're interested, you could take a look at that as you're considering what courses to take for next fall. Also, I would love to have all of you in that class if I could, but take a look at it anyway. Okay, so that's a quick look at political ecology. Some upcoming assignments just to review. We are going to resume our reading question and comment post. Remember that? We did that before break, the Q&C thing. We're going to start that for next week. And I'm going to call that COVID week 1, just so we'll start our counting system over because we're in such a different place now. So by midnight on Sunday, that's March 29, read these readings for next week: 6.18, 3.14, 6.27, 2.7, 2.8, and post one question and one comment on Notebowl for those. We're really moving into a different section next week that is more about how do we try to alleviate or address some of these problems we've been talking about all semester. And the first way we'll look at that is environmental laws and regulations. So next week is kind of talking about environmental law and regulation. So the question and comment thing is due by Sunday night, March 29 on Notebowl. The other thing you have going on is your Environmental Justice Lab, which some of you have already turned in. That is due April 1. That's next Wednesday on Notebowl. Certainly you could turn that in before then if you wanted to. And then next week we also have quiz 3. So the quizzes are going to be a little bit different than our usual, obviously, because we're in a different world. I have placed a link on Notebowl Bulletin that is to the review sheet for this third quiz to give you an idea of what materials. It's basically the biodiversity section and then this bit on environmental justice and political ecology that we did this week. So that link is on Notebowl. You can take a look at that. This is going to be a take-home quiz. Of course, you're home. I have to give a take-home quiz, right? It'll have 3 essay questions. I haven't made it up yet, but this is what I envision. They're each going to be worth 20 points, and it will be on some aspect of these materials that we've covered. And obviously it's take home, so it's open note, open book. You'll have all your materials. So the questions are not going to be objective type, you know, define this or what does this word mean. They're going to be a little bit deeper. We're asking you to maybe look at a graph from a study or consider something and think a little bit more deeply about putting some of these thoughts together. I don't think that means it'll be more difficult. It just means it's a different sort of question. So how do you prepare for a quiz like this? I think just review all the materials, make sure you've read them. If you take notes on these things, which I hope you do, have your notes in order so that you don't have to spend forever looking for material. There's going to be a time limit on this quiz. I think 2 hours is what I'm thinking right now. My plan is to make it available next Wednesday, April 1 at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and you'll have 2 hours to complete it. So that means you don't want to spend, if there's a question on, I don't know, elephants, you don't want to spend 2 hours looking for your notes on elephants and then have no time left to answer the question. So the best thing you can do to prepare for this is to have read everything, have looked at all the YouTubes and links I've given you and thought about them and taken some notes on them, and then have your thoughts and notes organized so that you can respond to the questions in the time you have. So I'm still working on making that, but that's the plan for the quiz next week. So those are the things that are happening out there. If you have any questions about any of this, absolutely email me or contact me, and we'll remain in touch that way. I hope you have a good weekend, and I hope you're well and healthy and able to keep up with your work, and that this remote learning is working okay for you, even if it's not your favorite thing in the world to be doing. Have a good weekend.